And in Somerset, the A361 at Frome closed following an accident, and that's the very latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Hello there, happy Friday to you. It's 6 o'clock, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co.
Growth is the #1 mission of this government.
You're not doing a great job though, are you? Because the latest figures out today show that growth was nowhere near the level expected. What do you think? Also, get this everyone, a Reform UK MP has said that taxpayers should not be footing the bill for translation services. What do you think to that? Also, I say it this often, don't I, everyone? We live in some kind of weird clown world, but get this, kids as young as 9 years old have been investigated for non-crime hate incidents. Are you ready? For calling each other names. Please, give me some strength. And you'll need your strength for the next story, everyone, because awful. A paedophile with the worst kind of child abuse images has today avoided jail. I've got a question for you. How on earth does this keep happening, especially when we see him utterly obsessed with jailing other people for their tweets? And a story that caught my eye, a village Christmas market has been cancelled for the first time in 25 years due to the amount of health and safety prep that they need to do, not least in relation to potential terror attacks. What is going on? Lots to get stuck into, and who better to do it with? Look, my Friday favourites, Lord Daniel Moylan, the Tory Life Peer, and Paul Embry, the trade unionist and broadcaster. But before we get stuck in, let's cross live for the 6 o'clock news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler with your headlines from the GB Newsroom. 4 teenagers and a 45-year-old man have been convicted of murdering 15-year-old Mason Rist and 16-year-old Max Dixon, who were attacked with machetes in a case of mistaken identity. 18-year-old Riley Tolliver, a 16-year-old boy and a 17-year-old boy, and getaway driver 45-year-old Anthony Snook were found guilty of the murders of Mason and Max by a jury of 9 men and 3 women at Bristol Crown Court after a 6-week trial. A 15-year-old boy was also found guilty of the murder of Max after previously pleading guilty to the murder of Mason. A serving Metropolitan Police officer has been sacked after accessing confidential files about the case of Sarah Everard. PC Miles McHugh was among 3 officers who were found to have committed gross misconduct at a 3-week disciplinary tribunal in South East London. 33-year-old Miss Everard was kidnapped, raped and murdered by then-serving Met Officer Wayne Couzens in March 2021. GB News can now confirm that 33,000 small boat migrants have crossed the Channel this year. More than 100 others crossed in 2 small boats today, while another boat is making the crossing this moment. It comes just a day after the Prime Minister announced the significant arrest of a suspected migrant boat supplier. In other news, Chancellor Rachel Reeves says she's not satisfied with the figures after the UK's economy barely grew between July and September. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the 3rd quarter over the year. Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says the figures are extremely disappointing, while the Prime Minister said the government needs to align with the US and the EU for economic growth.
We need good relations both with the US and with the EU. I've been very clear that I don't think the deal that we've got with the EU is good enough, and that's why we are resetting that and looking for a better deal, whether that's on security and defence, hugely important, but also on trade. So I do think we can do better than what we've got, and that's why we've spent a lot of time and invested in resetting that relationship.
And in sport, boxing champion Mike Tyson slapped Jake Paul at a charged weigh-in for tonight's controversial heavyweight fight in Texas. After both men had weighed in, Paul crawled across the floor before rising up to Tyson's eyeline for the traditional final head-to-head. 58-year-old Tyson then slapped his opponent across the face, prompting security and team members to rush in to separate the fighters. Paul, however, seemed unfazed. Instead, he blew kisses at the former champion. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Michelle.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company on this Friday evening till 7 o'clock. Alongside me, Lord Daniel Moylan, the Tory life peer in the House of Lords, and Paul Embry, the trade unionist and broadcaster. I've missed you too. I've not had you together in the studio for quite some time. Welcome back, everyone. What did you think back to that boxing story there at the end of the headlines?
Mike Tyson was a great fighter in his day, and I always think it's quite sad when they come back when they're in their 50s or 60s, because they've taken a heck of a lot of punishment throughout their careers. I mean, you often see old boxers kind of walking around, they're punch drunk, they've got Parkinson's disease, quite often they die early, they suffer from dementia and what have you. And I can't imagine Mike Tyson needs to do this for the money. Perhaps he does, but I just think it's incredibly sad that at that time in their life they're putting themselves through it. It's going to create a huge amount of entertainment for people. I mean, billions, hundreds of millions will be watching it. But I think really it's a bit sad.
Do you?
I'm a boxing fan, by the way.
Are you? Are you a boxing fan?
No, I'm not a boxing fan.
Are you not?
No,
you could have fooled me.
I watch a lot of sport, you know. Michelle, I'm not the best person to pick up on.
It's an odd phenomenon, isn't it? What do you think to it? These YouTubers versus these once very elite athletes. If you've got any strong feelings on that, get in touch and let me know. There's so much that we need to discuss this evening. Yet again, another paedophile has escaped jail. I want to look at that before the end of the programme. Why? Ladies and gents, why? When we're so obsessed with putting people in prison for their tweets, why do these awful, awful people avoid jail? I want to look at that and lots of other stuff. You get in touch with me all the usual ways. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. Go to the website, gbnews.com/yoursay, or you can tweet or X me. And it is Friday night, so if you do need to be out and about, you can take me with you on your radio. What a treat. Look, there's lots that we need to discuss. Shall we talk then about the economy? Because the Labour Party are very, very passionate about growth, and it's not happened. The latest figures that have come out show that actually we've had a small contraction instead. What do you make to this?
Well, the first thing I'd say, to be fair, is that it's It's not right to judge the performance of the economy on the basis of just a single set of figures in one fairly short period.
Yeah.
That said, it's perfectly clear that this Labour government has no idea what economic growth requires. No idea at all. The only thing they know about is growing the government. The main thing they need to do to get economic growth is cut taxes and get out of the way. And they're not doing any of that. They're putting taxes up and they're going round bad-mouthing the country the whole time. Rachel Reeves spent her entire time making everybody feel utterly gloomy about the British economy, even to the point of frightening investors off. No wonder we're not seeing any growth.
Indeed. Paul Embry?
She's put herself in the straitjacket of these stupid fiscal rules. She's treating government spending like it's a household budget, which is completely wrong. It's not a household budget. When you are a currency issuing sovereign government, you need never be short of money. You may lack resources, you may lack materials, you may lack labour, you may lack land, and you're restricted in that way. But as a sovereign country, we are not restricted in terms of the availability of money or capital, and you cannot cut your way to growth. The only way to sensibly and quickly get growth when you've got a sluggish economy as we have is to spend money on infrastructure, to spend money on investment and industry and so on. And it seems to me, Michelle, that it's almost as if, and there was some good stuff in the budget, there was some investment in schools and hospitals and a little bit for housing, though nowhere near enough for housing. But it seems to me almost a bit like we've got George Osborne back in the Treasury. I cannot see any particular difference ideologically between what George Osborne was saying when he came to power as a Chancellor in 2010 and talked incessantly about the deficit and about paying off debt and so on, and what Rachel Reeves is saying now. She says that if we can't afford it, we can't have it. That's a complete reversal of everything that John Maynard Keynes taught us, and which has been the philosophy of the left for decades, which is actually anything we can do, we can afford. She has turned that completely on its head. And for me, we've got a Chancellor who is not going to be anywhere near radical enough in terms of what needs to be done to create growth and to reduce some of the real profound inequalities in terms of wealth and income that we've got in this country.
In fact, you'd have been much closer to Liz Truss's budget, wouldn't you, or Kwasi Kwarteng's?
Well, I don't know about that.
That would have gone down a treat in
I don't know about that,
the Embry household.
But I was concerned at the reaction in terms of Liz Truss's budget. I didn't like Liz Truss's mini budget, but in terms of the way that a Prime Minister, a democratically elected government, had that programme completely undermined and resisted by the markets, and the way that people on the left jumped on that and essentially said, well, yes, this is absolutely right. Of course the markets are right to get uneasy and to get unsettled and to get jittery. Well, just what happens if a radical Labour government came to power? We don't have a particularly radical one economically at the moment, and said, actually, we are going to do some radical stuff. And the markets will get jittery and they will start howling because they think that they're going to suffer in terms of their own wealth and their own influence. What would a Labour government do? I would like to think a Labour government would face them down and say, look, actually, we're a democratically elected government. This is our programme. This is what we're going to do. And we're not going to be held to ransom by a few people in the city who happen to have enormous wealth but have influence far beyond what they actually create.
You missed the point about the city. The point is that you wouldn't have to worry about the markets if you didn't owe them a shed load of money. It's because we borrowed so much money that the markets have influence. Don't borrow any money and they've got no influence. It's not because they're rich, it's because we borrowed our money from them.
One of my viewers, Andrew, he just got in touch and said...
There's no need for us to borrow from the markets. That's a completely different argument, but we'll have it one day, I'm sure.
We'll have it one day, not today, though, because Andrew, one of my viewers, he's got in touch and said... what's going on when it comes to Rachel Reeves and her CV? Is she economist? Isn't she an economist or what? This has created quite a stir, hasn't it? And she's updated, apparently, her LinkedIn profile now. So it used to say that she was an economist at the Bank of Scotland. She's now changed
Bank of England, I think.
to say...
No, the Bank of Scotland, which became Halifax.
Yeah. So she's now... Yes, thank you. I'm across my facts. Thank you. Lord mine. Chirping up there, isn't he? Like some kind of BBC Verify on my right shoulder blade there.
Wrong.
Yes, I know.
Chief fact checker Moylan on the...
Don't you love it when the fact checkers are actually wrong? You should go get a job at BBC Verify you. Anyway, look, she reckoned that she was an economist at the Bank of Scotland. Well, now she's changed it to say that she did retail banking at Halifax. Nigel Farage reckons that she was just in charge of ordering the paper clips. What's going on there?
It is slightly disturbing. The press haven't really caught the wind in the mainstream media, I don't think, particularly. But I do think, as a matter of integrity, actually, it is slightly worrying if a Chancellor of the Exchequer has, assuming she did do it, suggested in her CV that she was an economist working for, you know, a well-known bank, and it turns out that she wasn't an economist. I'm not suggesting it's a resigning matter, but I do think there are questions, and this does happen from time to time, doesn't it? You know, people will embellish their CVs when they want a particular job. And I guess there are millions of people out there who have gone for jobs and talked up their CVs and exaggerated them. So she's not the only one. However, she is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And when you're in that position, I don't think you can get away with that.
You can't. There's nowhere to hide, is there? You've got fact checkers everywhere, as we've just discovered.
I agree. I agree with Paul. It is a matter of integrity, but I don't think it's the most important thing. The most important thing is not was she good counting the paper clips at Bank of Scotland or whatever she did. The important thing is she good at being Chancellor? I'm afraid the truth is that up to the moment she's rubbish. She's complete rubbish.
Well, she would say it's early days. It's early days. She would say, give me some time to crack on with my agenda. And speaking about cracking on with agendas, I'm going to be cracking on. There's so much we need to discuss, ladies and gents. I hope you're sitting comfortably. Should we be paying for translators? Or if you want to use the NHS, should you either learn English or pay for your own translator? That is the suggestion of one Reform UK MP. Tell me your thoughts.
I'm Christopher Hope. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now we're joined now by Sophia Viraji, the co-founder of the Azaylia Foundation, which was created due to the tragic passing of her 8-month-old daughter to leukemia. The foundation is doing some incredible work for children's cancer.
Yeah, some really incredible stuff. They've just launched a PhD even where they're funding young doctors to specialise in childhood cancer as, get this, I wasn't aware of this, it's one of the most underfunded areas in the NHS. So not many sectors choose to go down that route, unfortunately. The charity, the foundation, have donated over £1 million worth of equipment to hospitals as well, and we're delighted to welcome Sophia. You've turned a tragedy and grief into triumph, I guess, and something so inspiring. Just tell us about that. Do you recognise that in yourself and the work you're doing?
Yeah, I'm here to always honour my daughter and to always continue her name, her legacy, and to support all of these other children fighting against childhood cancer.
It was all over social media. I mean, you were, at one point, probably one of the most famous families in this country because of Azaylia and Azaylia's fight. When you look back now at that time, does it give you comfort that you had so many people behind you?
Absolutely. The community that we have got, the humanity that we've seen in the UK and all around the world, in fact, has really touched my heart, and that kindness, love and support has always been the backbone of carrying me through this, to give me hope, to give me belief, and it still inspires me and encourages me till today to continue to do that, to show that light, to show that courage and bravery.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello everyone, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Lord Moylan alongside me, as is Paul Embry. I was just thanking Lord Moylan there for his birthday wishes when I was off, but he had no idea what I was talking about, quite frankly, so I'll take it all back now. But anyway, look, let's talk translation services, shall we? Some would say that many people might need a translator to understand my accent, but the ones in question today are the NHS translation services, because a Reform UK MP, Rupert Lowe, he says that we taxpayers should not be on the hook for these services. He's put quite a no messing about tweet, if I should call it that. Let me get it up on the screen for you. He says, if you want to access NHS treatment in an English hospital, the options are quite simple in his view. And he lists them. 1, speak English. 2, bring your own translator. 3, use technology. Or 4, pay for the translation. He says it is not the British taxpayers' responsibility to fund translation into hundreds of foreign languages. Let me give you some context, ladies and gents, before I bring Paul in. NHS Trust apparently spent over £113 million on interpreters during 2019 to 20. What do you think to this, Paul Embry?
I think if a person is taken to A&E, for example, after...
Oh, sorry, 2019 to 2022, sorry, my figure was then, apologies.
If a person is taken to A&E after a car accident and this person doesn't speak much English or any English at all, and this person's life, welfare might be in the balance, what do we say? Do we say, no, we are not going to bring an interpreter in because actually we don't provide for that in the National Health Service because we think that costs too much money. And therefore, if you can't understand what we're saying to you, you're just going to have to lump it, or you're going to have to pay for your own interpreter.
So you're saying we should have it in emergency situations, yeah?
Well, certainly in those situations, I think it would be absolutely inhuman to say to somebody who's been seriously injured and who can't speak English. It might be a tourist, for example. It might be someone who's here on holiday and doesn't speak English. Do we say we're not going to provide an interpreter for you? Or even someone who's just been to see a consultant because there's something, they might have cancer, for example. Do we say we're not going to provide an interpreter to explain your diagnosis to you, to explain your treatment plan, to tell you the things that you need to be doing so that we can give you your prognosis, the things that you need to be doing to get better? I do understand the concerns over it, genuinely I do. I think by and large, I don't think councils, for example, should spend large amounts of money on translation services. I think we are entitled as an independent, self-governing nation to say, actually, the primacy of our own culture and the primacy of our own language is what matters. I wouldn't go and live in another country and insist that they translated everything for me. I don't think most people would. But we're talking.
They laugh at you in most countries.
I think they would laugh at me, yeah. But we're talking about, potentially critical care here. And I think in exceptional circumstances, I think it would be inhuman to deny people that facility, frankly.
So you say yes in critical care scenarios. Where are you?
Well, first of all, I've long thought that anyone who comes to live in this country on a permanent basis should commit themselves to learning English in the first 6 months. People should say, I'm going to learn English. But I do agree with Paul, in critical circumstances, and that isn't just in A&E necessarily. I mean, there are critical... Not everything in A&E is critical, by the way, but there are critical circumstances like the car crash in A&E, and there can be critical circumstances on a ward. And sometimes the doctors just need to know what the experience is, and they might need to have a translator available. But the fact is that nearly all of this stuff is going to be able to, you'll be able to do this with artificial intelligence or just Google Translate quite soon. We're already at the point where most of it could be done. So ordinary communications with patients could actually be done and printed off in whatever language you wanted at the press of a button. And that's, I think, what the NHS should be saying. That's the position we're going to get to.
But do you
this is our plan for doing it.
Daniel, do you think consultants in the example of critical care, potentially life or death, as we're talking about there, I wouldn't particularly want a consultant to rely on Google Translate when they're giving a diagnosis and they're telling you, you know, what you're about to have an operation and what it's going to involve or what your recovery plan is going to be.
Well, you might not want to, but then it depends how long you've been here and whether... Which is more important? Would you rather have the emergency operation, or would you rather hang around waiting for an NHS translator to be allocated?
Well, no, sure, but I think
the answer most people would say is, if it's that critical, get on with the operation and tell me later.
But the debate is whether the NHS interpreter should be provided at all. And I mean, as far as I can understand from what Rupert Lowe is saying, I might be wrong, is he's saying that there should be no translation facilities within the NHS. We should not be funding any translation facilities. And I think that argument can be debunked quite quickly, simply with the scenarios that we've been discussing here. You know, we're talking about extreme scenarios, maybe, but nonetheless, they do happen in hospitals up and down the country every day. And I would not want to live in a country that essentially says to people in a life or death critical situation, if you can't understand it, yeah,
I don't think it actually, in a life or death critical situation, it really
or
isn't.
Even if they're seriously ill. And
what matters in a life or death critical situation, frankly, is not what the patient understands. It's what the doctor understands. It's the doctor who needs to know now, is the pain there or there? What sort of pain it is?
Okay.
Right, that's the information that is critical. Sure. Not explaining, with every possible respect we have to, but explaining it to the patient is secondary. Okay. It's what the doctor needs to know. And that, I think, there everything should be done. There is a case. But to be honest, by the time you've got the translator in a critical situation, the doctor will probably have had to have made his mind up anyway, on the basis of experience, what is happening, and taken action.
I appreciate that. But in a scenario where the person's life might not be in danger, but they still need potentially a major operation, whether they've been involved in an accident or just as part of a serious illness.
You are going to have a major operation sometime in the next week.
And in those circumstances, I think it's incumbent on any civilised health system to provide an interpreter if the person can't understand what...
Let's take it away from the extreme.
I think a different story. And there I slightly do disagree with you, because, sorry, Michelle, you want to go on, but I mean, there are other options there. One of them is you pay for your own translator. Another one is you have a friend come in and who speaks your language and get them to explain it to you. And the third one is a technological type solution. I think there are other options. If you say, I'm going to explain this to you because you're going to have an operation in a week or so, it's life-threatening, it's important, but it's not critical.
I mean, there's, of course, a very obvious alternate solution to all of this, which is if you want to live in England, you could actually make quite an effort to learn the local language. That is the point, I think, that
most
Rupert
Lowe to be fair. I think
is making.
I think there's a bit of a myth that, you know, people who come here, by and large, don't want to learn the language. In my experience...
Well, something's going on, or else we wouldn't be spending over 113 million quid on translation.
I think there are some people in perhaps older generations who perhaps can't speak it as a first language, but most people can. Most new arrivals, soon after arriving, can.
OK, well, you can tell me what you think to that. Look, after the break, lots that I need to discuss with you. Why do you think we keep seeing scenarios where so many paedophiles escape being jailed, whilst on the other hand, we obsess, it seems, with jailing people for things that they write on their tweets? And also, when it comes to children, why are 9-year-olds getting investigated under so-called non-crime hate incidents? You tell me. See you in 2.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Big changes in the weather are on the way this weekend. Initially it turns more unsettled and then it increasingly turns cold from the north with some wintry weather expected in some places by Sunday, more widely at times through next week. A cold front's introducing the change. That's going to bring a spell of short-lived but heavy rain across Scotland overnight, Northern Ireland then, as well as gusty winds, and that cold front then sinks into Northern England and North Wales by dawn. Ahead of that, a lot of cloud, so mild for many as we begin the weekend, but some clear spells in the far south leading to a few pockets of frost and fog first thing. However, the cold winds are starting to arrive by this stage across northern parts of the country, while southern parts, after that frosty start, will warm up with cloud starting to increase from the north and a rather grey day for much of England and Wales. More persistent rain there for parts of North Wales and Northern England at 8 a.m. on Saturday. Scotland and Northern Ireland, meanwhile, subject to winds coming increasingly from the Arctic. It's going to feel cold then in the north, but it's also going to be brighter. Some sunny spells coming through for Scotland and Northern Ireland, albeit with quite a number of showers arriving into the afternoon for northern and western Scotland in particular. These showers will be falling as rain, sleet and hail at lower levels, and above 200 or 300 metres in the north of Scotland, they'll be falling and settling as snow. So a bitter feel in the far north, but a mild afternoon with lighter winds in the south. By Sunday, the cloud and rain clears away from the south, a colder feel for many, but also bright skies for much of the day across the south and the east, whilst Northern Ireland and then southwest Scotland, northwest England and North Wales see outbreaks of rain move in. That will turn to snow over the tops of the Pennines. Monday, more wet weather for many areas with some hill snow in the north.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems in North Yorkshire continue to the A174, which remains closed westbound off the Greystones roundabout at Lazenby, just south of Middlesbrough, of course, at the scene of an accident. On the M6 in Cheshire, the inside lane's closed southbound from junction 18 to 17 near Crewe. Recovery works underway following a multi-vehicle collision. And on the M6 in the West Midlands, one lane stays shut northbound junction 5 to 6 towards Spaghetti Junction towards Birmingham. A lorry was on fire and recovery work is underway. Just south of Nottingham City Centre, the A60 Loughborough Road closed off the A52 for accident investigation work, and in Dorset west of Bridport the A35 is blocked near to Morecambe Lake following an accident. On London Underground, the Hammersmith and City line is suspended Liverpool Street to Barking with severe delays on the rest of the line following a points failure at Aldgate East. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Hello there, Michelle Dewberry. Till 7 of you just joining us alongside me. I've got my panel, Lord Daniel Moylan, the Conservative Life peer in the House of Lords, and Paul Embry, the trade unionist and broadcaster. That conversation we're just having about whether or not taxpayers should be funding translators in the NHS, I can tell you it's got quite a reaction from you guys at home. So many people getting in touch with your stories, saying that you've been to different foreign countries and had incidences and you've had to pay the bill. Ken says, I live in a European country and there's no help with translation whatsoever. I've had to fight really hard to try and learn the language of the location. Dylan says, Michelle, the NHS is a health service. It's not a translation service. And Doreen, a friend of mine who's watching, hello, Doreen, she says she had an accident in Spain and she had to pay for her own translator. So people are asking the question, why do we seem to do things completely differently? I shall leave you to ponder that question. But look, police the streets, not the tweets. Really? That sounds great, doesn't it? And that is the message to the Prime Minister. Following this rise in so many people being investigated now for non-crime hate incidents. And I say that it sounds good. It does, but I don't actually feel that it's happening because children as young as 9 years old now are among people that are being probed for these kind of incidents for things like calling each other names. Like there's 2 secondary pupils that said that other children smell of fish. Now, I don't really think that you should go around suggesting people smell of fish, don't get me wrong, Daniel Moylan. But it's not really a non-crime hate incident, is it?
The first thing is, a non-crime hate incident is not a crime. The clue is in the name. And why the police take an interest in them in the first place is totally mysterious. A lot of it goes back to the fact that you've got this thing called the College of Policing, which sets standards for the police and gives them guidance. And they've been pushing on this non-crime hate incident. Under the last government, in Parliament, we managed to put a bit of a cap on it and pull them back. But since the general election, they seem to have lifted the cap and they're off again all over the place. These are not crimes. The police should be out there investigating crimes. And they're not. Well, they are, but they're not doing enough of that. And they're spending their time going around, people. Now, there are things you can say that genuinely are crimes. Incitement to violence and things like that are crimes. They've been crimes for decades, if not centuries. They are crimes. But when you're talking about hurty words and things like that, non-crime hate incidents, the police should not be bothering with them at all, given all the other pressures that they've got to face, in my view.
I remember Amber Rudd, the former Home Secretary, she had an investigation under one of these things for a speech that she gave about foreign workers, where I think she was suggesting, she had the audacity to suggest that companies in this country might want to focus on trying to prioritise British workers. I remember that. Anyway, Paul Embry, where are you?
Well, the concept is completely Orwellian, isn't it? I think everybody knows that. It's got no place in a free society. Daniel's right. The police should investigate actual crimes, not incidents that are not crimes and are never going to be crimes. But the truth is, I mean, what's going on here these are not exceptions. That is the world in which we live. And either we have to reconcile ourselves to that, where there is a chance that you can get a knock at the door by the police if you say something that offends someone, even though it's not a criminal offence because it's not incitement or anything like that. We either reconcile ourselves to that, or we say, actually, we need to push back on this because this is just becoming chilling. I mean, we've seen in recent days the story of Alison Pearson, the Daily Telegraph columnist, who had a knock at the door because of a tweet she posted a year ago. And either we challenge it head on, or we have to accept that this creeping atmosphere that we have with the police arrogating to themselves more and more powers, and in some cases not even arrogating to themselves because actually they've been given that power explicitly under legislation, is the world that we're going to live in, where we just obsess over words, where we police words as ruthlessly as we police actions. I think that's the society that we live in, and it needs to be challenged. But in order to do that, you need a grassroots movement, of course you do. But you also need people in positions of public influence demonstrating a bit more bravery than they do. It's all very well politicians coming out as they do from time to time, saying yes, we need to challenge the woke agenda. But actually doing something about it in terms of pushing back on some of the legislation that has come in over recent years, which gives the police these sorts of powers. When it comes to the crunch, they're often found wanting, and politicians need to start putting their head above the parapet.
But when it comes to this wokeness, I can feel it in my water, ladies and gents. I feel like we're about to turn a corner thanks to the whole Trump situation in the US. It makes me feel very happy, actually. Do you share my optimism and sentiment? Let me ask you this, though, right? Because on the one hand, we talk about people having knocks on the door from the police. We see people being sent to prison for things that they have put on Twitter. Or actually, there was a case recently, that lady, the care worker, who was filming some of the unrest. She got sent to prison. It stopped me in my tracks then, Lord Moylan, when I saw this disgusting, disgraceful individual in the news today. Someone who was a trainee teacher. I mean, how revolting can you actually get? A 26-year-old. He had imagery, and I will apologise, ladies and gents, because this is grotesque. It was the worst kind of child abuse one can imagine. It was newborn babies being raped, and I apologise for the graphicness, but I need you to understand the kind of thing that I'm discussing here. This man, this horrendous man, didn't get sent to prison. And I was looking into this. 80% of those convicted of possessing indecent child abuse imagery are avoiding prison. It makes me feel so angry and sickened. Why is this happening, Lord Moylan, do you think?
I don't know, but I'd say a couple of things. First of all, the prisons are full. Prisons are full and nobody can afford to build new prisons. And if you could afford to build them, nobody wants to have them in their area. And there's huge protests about having a new prison in your area. And so it's been very difficult for governments to build any new prisons. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is the focus more and more, rightly or wrongly, is on protecting the public from violence. And while I agree it's perfectly possible that in this case, I don't know about this case, the details, You could say there's an element of public protection, but the fact is, being there with a computer and you're not necessarily going out and hurting other members of society.
No, let me be clear.
I want to respond to that. There is a punitive element to that.
No, I need to respond to that point. You say that someone's sitting at the end of the screen looking at these images and therefore they're not really hurting members of the public. No. When you look at a crime scene, which is what these images are, you're looking at a crime scene. You are looking at a real victim. In this case, we're talking about tiny little babies that have absolutely been harmed. And whilst you might sit in your basement behind a screen viewing these things and sharing these screens, be in no doubt that looking at these things, distributing these things, commenting on these things is absolutely fueling harm. It's fueling actual harm of children.
You're arguing with
creates a market.
Yes.
You're not arguing on the same point, but the point I'm trying to... of course, I agree with all of that.
But this is why they're avoiding jail, because of the point you're making, which is that the judge is basically saying there's no real risk to the public. But what I'm saying is there is a risk to the public, the children.
That was the argument. You know, this whole thing of child pornography...
There's no such thing as child pornography. How can there be such a thing as child pornography? A baby cannot be a porn star. There's no such thing as child pornography. There's only ever child abuse, which is actually a crime scene.
Yeah. OK. Images of child... I know you feel very strongly about this,
I feel really,
Michelle.
really strongly about this, yeah.
Child abuse obviously has always been a crime. The question of having images of child abuse, only became a crime back in the 1980s. I remember the arguments at the time. And many of these arguments were had around that time. And of course, it did become a crime at that stage, but it's never ranked up there, you know, with the actual abuse itself. But the argument was made at the time that, of course, there may not be a child involved in this, but behind it there is a child involved. On the other side of it, there is a child, and you're creating a demand for that. And all those arguments I had at the time. And I completely understand that. But I'm just saying there are a number of reasons why these people aren't going to jail. I'm not saying these are the right reasons. I'm just telling you what I think is going on.
The viewing of this stuff, in my mind, should absolutely be akin to the creation of this stuff, because if no one was viewing this vile, horrendous stuff, these poor, innocent children would not be having their lives devastated forever because of this.
I agree completely. And this particular individual should have been sent to prison for a very long time, in my view. I don't think there can be any defence for doing what he did. It's an appalling way for any human being to act. There will inevitably be future victims because of the demand that he's helped to create by circulating so many of these images to so many people. And I think we're in danger of the public losing faith almost completely in the criminal justice system and the police and the courts because of what they see as selective tough justice. I'm in favour of tough justice, don't misunderstand me, but what we're seeing to a certain degree is selective tough justice, where people who do carry out the most horrendous crimes, in this sort of case that we're talking about now, and in some cases, serious violence as well, violence where they attack strangers and cause significant injuries, are being let off, they're walking free from court and with maybe a suspended sentence or a community order or something like that. This is not myth. Those cases are well documented. But when people go onto social media and make comments which are undoubtedly, if we're talking about the summer unrest, undoubtedly were unpleasant and in some cases were incitement, no question about it, but were being sent to jail for 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years. People look at that, I think, and say, hold on a second, what are the priorities of our justice system? How can it possibly be right that someone who does something like this, where child victims are on the other side of it, walks free from court, and somebody who put something on Facebook and later deleted it because they realised it was a bit over the top, gets sent to prison for 2 years? If that sort of thing keeps happening, public trust will inevitably collapse in the criminal justice system, and no one should be surprised at that.
Well, the head of the National Crime Agency, he supports tougher punishments for people that are convicted of having these indecent images. I'll tell you again, 80% of those convicted for possessing these indecent images of children are avoiding prison. I think that is such a shame. It's a stain on our society. If we don't stand up for and protect the most vulnerable people in our society, our children, our babies, then what on earth is our society coming to? Speaking of what our society is coming to after the break, Christmas market, one now that's been in place for 25 years, cannot continue. Why? Because of all the health and safety, not least because of the risk of a terror attack. What is going on, ladies and gents? Dewberry Tavern will open as well. See ya.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Following the summer riots and the resurgence of far-right ideologies, the former Education Secretary told peers that reinforcing shared values is now more crucial than ever.
So we're asking this morning, should we teach British values or would it be a step backward?
Or how do you even start? To debate this now, we're joined by the Campaign for Real Education chairman, Chris McGovern, and political commentator Matthew Stadlen.
Well, I think these days, particularly in schools, it's quite fashionable to look at the negative sides of Britain's identity, particularly British history. Personally, I think I'm very proud of being British, and I think we need to be proud of our country like most other countries around the world are.
As Chris says, Matthew, lots of other countries do it. Heck, you only have to look at the United States, don't you, to see how sort of patriotic they are. Is there anything wrong in trying to instil a bit of that amongst our youth?
I'm just worried it sounds a little bit communist, Stephen, being told what it is to be British. I've got my own personal but very vague views of what British values might be: inclusivity, patience, being able to queue, decency, respect for democracy and the rule of law. But I mean, very many people will have different sets of values. Some people are racist. So are British values racist? You talked about the far right. I think we all know what the far right is. It's sort of violent, xenophobic racism. But if you have, say, I don't know, 3-4 million people in this country who might describe themselves as racist or far right, and they're British, or as British as you lot and as I am, does that mean those values get taught in schools? My worry is it's a little bit communist.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello everybody, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight alongside me Lord Moylan and Paul Embry remain. But look, it is Friday, Dewberry Tavern is open, so cheers to each and every one of you at home. And cheers to my panel. Cheers, cheers. Cheers.
Paul, cheers.
My favourite part of the week, I can't lie. Look, I'll tell you what else is my favourite part of the year, actually, not just the week, Christmas. And who doesn't love a Christmas market, eh? Do you get involved? Do you like your local one? Well, a village in Lincolnshire has been forced to cancel their Christmas market. This is because, I mean, this Christmas market, it had been a thing for 25 years. And now the list of health and safety stuff that they have to do in order to facilitate this market, it was just too much. This year, they had to prepare for the risk of a potential terror attack. They had to basically close multiple roads off, pay for traffic marshals, fill in so much health and safety stuff. They just decided they couldn't do it with great sadness. They just couldn't progress with it. What do you think to this, Paul?
I think the terrorist thing probably for Woodhall Spa, no disrespect to Woodhall Sparians or whatever they're called, is probably a bit over the top. I can't imagine for a second that terrorists, jihadists are looking at attacking Woodhall Spa particularly. So that seems to me to be a bit disproportionate. But there are police. Greater Manchester Police, for example, tweeted a warning to people when they said,
"We've got it.
Well,
let's get it up on the screen." They were basically saying, "Look, the Christmas markets are coming back, and don't worry about it, everyone. We've got increased police presence." Whilst having two fellas with what looked to me like machine guns, there was a backlash towards that, and they had to delete that tweet, and they issued an upgraded, amended version of it. But continue.
And I think I saw that when it was posted, and I think first of all, I think it's very sad that a British police force was the need to advertise a Christmas market and then in the very next breath say, and we will effectively, have police there because of the threat of a terrorist attack. That's essentially what they're saying. And we know that the threat comes from jihadis, although they obviously didn't mention that. And that strikes me as, once again, fundamentally different to the society that we had even 20 years ago. I can't imagine a police force would have posted something like that. And when we're in a situation where we are holding Christmas markets, as we've always done in this country, but at the same time feeling the need to warn people against terrorist attacks because those markets will be a target, I think we do have to accept that we live in a fundamentally different society, even though so many people at the top of our society like to pretend that it's not happening. And these same people will often trot out the mantra, diversity is our strength. And I think anybody else knows, actually, that simply isn't true. Even if you are somebody who's in favour of the utmost diversity, the truth is it is not our strength. It is our greatest challenge. And posts like the ones that we've just seen, I think, are proof positive of that.
Daniel?
I agree with all of that, actually. I think the poor people of Woodhall Spa, the fact is that the local council and police seem not to have wanted this to happen, and the council loaded them up with more and more forms. Where I live, we have, it's not a Christmas market, we have the Residents' Association have an annual street party. The street's closed off by the council for the course of the afternoon and the early evening while the party's going on. There's music and local police are involved. They're not there to patrol it, as far as I know, but they come along as part of the community, and so on. And it works, and the council's very supportive. I think if they don't want it, they'll load you up with forms and get rid of it.
Has the risk of terror attacks changed, or does it change your thought process when considering things to do with your kids?
It doesn't stop me doing the things I would do, but there's no question that I think you do think differently. I mean, I'm in central London quite a lot, and it's impossible not to notice the bollards along some of the main bridges. And other areas of our cities, have got bollards because of fear of a terrorist attack. And even things like going into museums and galleries now, 20 or 30 years ago, even more recent than that, actually, you would just rock up to the British Museum or whatever it is, whatever museum, and you'd go in and you'd wander around. You can't even go into places like that now often without going through the whole sort of screening process and emptying your pockets and so on.
It's a sad state of affairs, isn't it?
It is a sad state of affairs, but it's almost a conspiracy of silence. People, I think, like to pretend that it's always been this way, but in fact, it hasn't always been this way. I mean, I'm old enough to remember a society that wasn't like this. And I'm not suggesting, actually, the measures that have been put in place are wrong or disproportionate or over the top. I think the truth is that there is a terrorist threat out there, and we can't relax in some of our towns and cities or at some of our festivals or events in the way that we once did. But
let's be fair, Paul, a lot of the measures you see of that character, bag checks, things like that, we should remember a lot of those were introduced as a result of IRA activity.
I'm not sure about that.
I remember it very, very clearly. I remember they're all going in. I remember even in the House of Commons, you used to be able to walk straight through the House of Commons. Nobody stopped.
Not museums and galleries. Places like that.
A lot of them.
Stadiums.
I don't know about football stadiums. Well, can't do the football thing with you, but I'll take your advice on that. But the museums, galleries, and so on, all of these things started to do with the IRA when they started bombing us as well. So it wasn't all related to foreign or Islamic or jihadism or whatever. We grew it ourselves here in the UK when it started. And of course, once it's in, it never goes. It just gets strengthened because nobody ever has the courage to say, let's take that out. Because if something then did happen, they'd be the one to take the blame.
It's a ratchet effect.
For taking it out. There's a ratchet effect. It always goes in one direction only.
But we've got to be able to have honest and brave conversations about this stuff, because you'll all remember that awful terror attack about Ariana Grande, that concert, and you'll all also remember that it came out in the inquest, didn't it, that the guy, the security guy, he had concerns, didn't he, about that fella with a massive backpack who he instinctively knew there's something not quite right here, that fella looks out of place. He didn't dare say anything because he didn't want to be called racist. And I think, of course, are we still in Islamophobia? Is it Awareness Week or month? I can't remember which one it is, but many people will talk about people having issues with the likes of Islam, but no one ever seems to acknowledge, well, why is that? Why do some people have a concern about that religion? Because there seems to be this massive disability, if you like, or it's just a refusal to look at the fact, well, actually, so many terror attacks have occurred now in this country by people who say that they're acting on behalf of their Islamic religion and trying to perform jihad. Of course, it makes people anxious about that religion. I'm not saying that all Muslims are terrorists or anything even close like that, but you've got to be able to have honest, robust conversations about why people feel afraid, what's driving that. Because only then, if you have those conversations, can you actually start to figure out some solutions to some of these challenges that affect so many people, no? Look, lots of you still getting in touch with me tonight about that translation story that we discussed earlier in the day. If you've missed it, you'll have to go back and watch it on Catch Up. It's about Rupert Lowe from Reform UK. He's saying that people need to fund their own translation services. I've got to say, there's a lot of people agreeing with you, Paul, that in terms of urgent need or anything like that, people are suggesting, yep, fair enough. But in things that are less urgent, many people also getting in touch saying that ultimately people should be funding their own translation. But then the question begs then, doesn't it, why just restrict that to the NHS? Should that be the case across broader public services if indeed we are in a situation where times are tight when it comes to the public purse? Lots of you also getting in touch with that first issue about the growth. There doesn't seem to be a lot of optimism out there for about the Labour Party and how much growth we can actually achieve. If you ask me, I think we need one of the equivalents of what they're doing with Elon Musk over in the States, where they're creating that Department of Government Efficiency. Isn't that optimistic? Isn't that energising? Wouldn't you like to see something like that here in this country? Don't hold your breath. Paul, Daniel, thank you for your company. Thank you for yours. Have a good weekend. See you Monday night.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Big changes in the weather are on the way this weekend. Initially it turns more unsettled and then it increasingly turns cold from the north with some wintry weather expected in some places by Sunday, more widely at times through next week. A cold front's introducing the change. That's going to bring a spell of short-lived but heavy rain across Scotland overnight, Northern Ireland then, as well as gusty winds, and that cold front then sinks into Northern England and North Wales by dawn. Ahead of that, a lot of cloud, so mild for many as we begin the weekend, but some clear spells in the far south leading to a few pockets of frost and fog first thing. However, the cold winds are starting to arrive by this stage across northern parts of the country, while southern parts, after that frosty start, will warm up with cloud starting to increase from the north and a rather grey day for much of England and Wales. More persistent rain there for parts of North Wales and Northern England at 8 a.m. on Saturday. Scotland and Northern Ireland, meanwhile, subject to winds coming increasingly from the Arctic. It's going to feel cold then in the north, but it's also going to be brighter. Some sunny spells coming through for Scotland and Northern Ireland, albeit with quite a number of showers arriving into the afternoon for northern and western Scotland in particular. These showers will be falling as rain, sleet and hail at lower levels, and above 200 or 300 metres in the north of Scotland, they'll be falling and settling as snow. So a bitter feel in the far north, but a mild afternoon with lighter winds in the south. By Sunday, the cloud and rain clears away from the south, a colder feel for many, but also bright skies for much of the day across the south and the east, whilst Northern Ireland and then southwest Scotland, northwest England and North Wales see outbreaks of rain move in. That will turn to snow over the tops of the Pennines. Monday, more wet weather for many areas with some hill snow in the north.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long delays continue in East Yorkshire on the M18. The motorway is partly blocked southbound from junction 7 to 6 towards Fawn, where a lorry is on fire. Meanwhile, on the M6 in the West Midlands, the inside lane's blocked off northbound, junction 5 to 6 towards Spaghetti Junction towards Birmingham. Basically, a lorry caught fire in the inside lane and recovery work is still taking place. On the M11 in Essex, one lane's closed southbound, 7 to 6 towards the M25 towards London following an accident. And on the M25,